Hello everyone! In this video we're going to be talking about our favorite water boy from Snezhnaya. This is Childe's second rerun, but this will be the first trial version of Childe that I will have had access to since making Genshin content on YouTube. So I decided that it would be fun to talk about how Genshin has decided to build him. We, of course, can already make some assumptions, but after seeing his build in the Itto event, MiHoYo has proven, to me at least, that it is capable of a few surprises. So we're going to get right into it. I'm going to look at all his talents, talk about a couple of his bow choices, and then charitably give my opinion on which bow fits what playstyle. Because something that I think doesn't get touched on enough when talking about meta is playstyle preference, and how some weapons are better to adapt to than others dependent entirely on how the player prefers to operate. I have a notepad document with a list of numbers and stats that I'll be reading from later and giving my opinion on each weapon. If I don't mention your weapon, very sorry, but always remember that my purpose is never to tell you how to play or build your characters. If anything, should this video sway you to choose one weapon over the other, I hope it's because the information reveals something about your playstyle and what choices help best facilitate that. So, let's get started. Hello, Childe, how's it going? You doing good? Alright, well, let's pull out the bow. There it is, the new Polar Star. Originally, in the Itto event, it was the Rust, and I'm pretty sure in his first incarnation of the trial run, it was also Rust. The thing that was really bizarre about the Itto event was that Childe's crit rate was stuck at 21%, while his crit damage was somewhere near like 150%. And I thought that was such a bizarre choice to give him a crit damage circlet when clearly the Rust isn't doing anything for his crit rate. But I'm sure that's fixed here, right? Right? Yes, it is. It's fixed by the weapon. The weapon, of course, having 30% crit rate. So we can already see that his attack is pretty much doubled, so we can assume an attack percent sans there. We can assume a crit damage circlet because of this. And if we see hydro damage, there's a good chance that that is a hydro goblet. So let's have a look at his artifact set. It is of course the 4-piece Heart of Depth set, which I believe was made specifically with Childe in mind. Considering the 4-piece activates after using an elemental skill, note that the elemental skill does not have to do damage, make contact in any way, shape, or form. All you have to do is activate it. So upon skill activation, you get 30% more normal and charge attack damage for 15 seconds. Pretty cool. And then of course you already have plus 15% for hydro damage. This is an interesting set to use for many characters, but only hydro characters really get the full benefit from it. So let's talk about Childe's talents before I get into the weapons and all that, shall we? So, we have his normal attack. His charged attack deals hydro damage, but it also applies the Riptide status, which is probably the most important factor when talking about Childe. Dependent upon the type of damage dealt and the source of that damage will deal a different kind of Riptide. So, whenever you do a fully aimed shot, you'll do the Riptide Flash. Defeating an opponent affected by Riptide creates a Hydro Burst that inflicts Riptide status on other opponents that get hit. So that's pretty cool. Note, though, that the damage dealt by Riptide will always be treated as normal attack damage, so it benefits greatly from the Heart of Depth set. I'm pretty certain that since the Foul Legacy Raging Tide transformation, you can switch to and from melee stance manually. I think that counts as a skill activation. I know definitely for certain that switching to the melee stance counts as a skill activation, but I'm not sure if manually switching back to bow also counts as skill activation, but it wouldn't be too far off to consider that as a possibility. In your bow stance, you probably could get the benefits from the 30% damage boost whenever you activate these Riptide effects. Riptide Slash, and here's the fun part. Hitting an opponent affected by Riptide with a melee attack unleashes the Riptide Slash. Damage dealt this way is considered elemental skill damage. So this is the part that is the most important. While all of his melee hits are treated as normal attack damage and as normal attack strikes. His Riptide Slash, however, will always be treated as elemental skill damage. And then we have his Burst, which treats his Riptide Blast as burst damage. Childe's got a lot of complicated things going on with Riptide, where one version of Riptide will be treated as one damage type, while another is treated as another damage type entirely. So it's always important, especially after the Raiden Shogun thing, that we pay attention to what kind of damage is being dealt whenever we're picking sets for our characters, and especially weapons. And it's going to be very important because we're going to be talking about the Polar Star pretty soon. So just keep in mind, this is burst damage. His melee attacks are normal attack damage, but the Riptide Slash is skill damage. And then here, whenever you're in bow mode, all that damage is treated as normal attack damage. So just keep all that in mind. It's very important to parse those things out, have a little bit of object permanence, and understand what's happening and when it's happening. But yeah, this set, couldn't argue with it. It's pretty good all around. Probably his best set. You could argue for Shimenawa if you were using the Thundering Pulse, which is another weapon that he could have access to, and we'll talk about that later, but for right now, let's go over the Polar Star. Elemental skill and elemental burst damage is increased by 12%. After using a normal attack or a charged attack, an elemental skill or an elemental burst hits the opponent, it can deal damage of 0. As long as it hits, that's all that matters. You gain up to 4 stacks of Ashen Nightstar, and thus your base attack is further increased up to 48%. So in terms of passive effects, this is interesting because you'll note that the duration of the stacks are 12 seconds. And if you go to Childe's Burst, it has a cooldown of 15 seconds. This means that Childe will never have the maximum amount of stacks when it's time to use his burst. He'll never get the full attack increase potential whenever he uses his burst. And I think that might be why the burst damage is also increased by 12%. But what this is telling me is that this bow specifically increases skill damage. It's specifically keeping Childe's Riptide Slashes in mind, which of course means that there's going to be more favorable damage while he's in his melee stance, because when he's in his bow stance, he's not going to get all the benefit from this bow. It's going to heavily favor the melee stance, which I feel like most people are going to use anyway, but whenever you're in cooldown, this bow is not going to do you many favors because all the Riptide statuses are going to be treated as normal damage. So this bow, specifically for melee stance, and it's specifically geared around trying to proc as many of his Riptide Slashes as humanly possible, which can be done by dealing crit hits. Note, you don't have to deal crit damage, you just have to make sure that when you hit an opponent, it would normally be a critical hit. After applying your critical hit, your normal and your charge attacks apply Riptide status, and of course, by continuing to attack, your normal attacks will trigger Riptide, which will then deal skill damage. So it's all about applying critical hits, making sure that your crit rate is pretty decent, which of course the bow has as its secondary stat. Get your stacks up so that you have maximum attack potential, and then activating as many Riptide Slashes as humanly possible in melee stance. That is the playstyle of this bow in particular. So I'm pretty sure we can do 2 stacks while in bow mode, because this is a charged attack right here. Ta-da! 1800. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's 2 stacks right there. But using the skill, making sure it hits, we have yet another stack. And now,
brace yourself. This is gonna hurt.
There we go. Now we have the maximum amount of stacks possible, which means now it's all about dealing crit strikes and getting those Riptide Slashes off. But you gotta make sure that you gotta do your charge attacks every now and again whenever you're doing your melee strikes, so that you're getting maximum attack potential.
Shouldn't let your guard down.
And maybe manually switching to melee mode, which is something I failed to do. But whatever. That's just a reflection of my playstyle capabilities. I'm sure many other people will be far better at maintaining that than I ever will be. But again, it all comes down to your playstyle and what you prefer to do. Like I said, this bow seems to heavily favor melee stance and utilizing Childe's second passive. Now, I have a notepad document in which I have Childe's stats at level 80, and assuming he has level 8 talents, where I use only main stats from the Heart of Depth set, and then I give him the usual 21% crit rate and the 41.9% crit damage that are the substats that are always given to every single character, no matter what, whenever you're in these trials. And then I switch out a crit rate circlet or a crit damage circlet dependent upon the weapon that he's wielding. So I'm going to leave this document in a link somewhere inside of the YouTube description box. But we have Childe with Rust, 1629 attack, 83.2 hydro damage. He gets a 40% bonus to all of his normal attacks, and of course with the Heart of Depth set, that's an extra 30% bonus whenever he changes stances, so that's about 70% damage bonus. Crit rate's 52.1%. Crit damage is going to be 91.9%. In my opinion, this bow is pretty good. It's probably a lot easier for most players to get to Refinement Rank 5. I currently have a Rust at Refinement 4, but there's also no guarantee you will ever pull this weapon. So as far as free-to-play options go, I'm not really sure about craftable bows or 3-star bows that could basically outperform this bow in particular, but I'm thinking maybe a kind of close substitute would be the slingshot. And of course the slingshot has built-in crit rate inside of it. I mean, if you're looking for a better option because you don't want to pull any of the 5-star bows and you don't have Rust, it might be a good option for you. Someone might mention it, and if they don't, I'm really sorry that I'm glossing over it right now. But the Rust is dependable. It's got easy to predict numbers, and it's fairly consistent. You can use it in bow form, you can use it in melee stance form. And just a reminder, from here on out, we're always going to assume that melee stance will do more damage because of the Hydro Goblet, and all of his attacks are infused with Hydro, so there you go. Childe with a Thundering Pulse, with a maximum bonus of 10 seconds of damage, has 1640 attack, which isn't that much higher than the Rust. However, I think it's a very clear upgrade from the Rust, and I say this because of all the different stacks that you have going on. You get one stack for doing a normal attack, you get another stack for simply using your skill. I don't even think that the skill is even required to make contact with anything, you just have to activate the skill. And then not having your elemental burst ready, not sitting on your elemental burst, gives you another stack, and that gives you a maximum of 40% normal attack bonus damage, which is the same as Refinement Rank 1 Rust. And even though you can probably refine and get the Rust more frequently than you can the Thundering Pulse, those who are lucky enough to have got the Thundering Pulse and not Rust will see this as a clear upgrade, because not only do you get that 40% bonus damage, it also comes with a built-in 20% attack increase, while Rust has an innate attack percent increase as its secondary stat. The Thundering Pulse frees up its secondary stat for crit damage, which means you can still use a crit rate circlet and everything's perfectly fine. So we have 1640 attack, we have 52.1 crit rate, same as before. We have 152.2% crit damage, which is a lot better than the Rust. And at Refinement Rank 1, they both even out. So yeah, I think in terms of refinement, the Thundering Pulse will only ever get better than Rust, but of course, the Rust being easier to get means that you have more opportunities to make the Rust just a better weapon. However, Thundering Pulse is very clearly an upgrade. It's very nice. The stacks aren't too hard to achieve. It incentivizes not sitting on your burst, so if you're waiting for like an ideal moment to activate it, it can be detrimental there, but all in all, it's pretty nice. It works in bow stance as well as the melee stance. You're just going to be missing out on the hydro damage, which you'll still get every now and then whenever you activate your Riptide Flash. We've already talked about Childe with the Polar Star. Well, I think that Thundering Pulse is pretty okay with low energy builds. The Polar Star is going to require a lot more energy, I think. You're really going to want to activate your Elemental Burst very frequently to keep up the damage numbers and to make your attack stat as high as it can possibly be. I have Childe here with 1480 attack. Now, of course, the trial version here of Childe has more attack, but that's because they have attack substats. I'm not including attack substats. But yes, we have 1480 all the way to a maximum of 1864. You'll have noticed that the Childe trial run that we just did had a maximum of 2000 something. We're missing out about a difference of 200 attack, which isn't too much. But you can see in terms of all the other bows that I've listed off where I didn't include attack substats, it starts out as a lower attack, and then after 2 stacks, it has the same amount of attack as the Thundering Pulse. And I think 2 stacks are a lot easier to accomplish than all 4 of them. But with all 4 of those stacks, you have 1864 attack, which is a lot better than the other 2 bows. However, like I said before, it benefits the melee stance a lot more. You're not going to get a lot of benefit to your bow stance, so whenever he's on cooldown, you're going to want to swap him out for somebody else. Or if you just really like Childe, just kind of tough it out for a while until he can go back to melee stance. It's all up to you. But if you prefer using Childe as much as possible and having him on the field as much as possible, maybe go with the Rust, maybe go with the Thundering Pulse. I wouldn't say that the Polar Star's for you necessarily, because it kind of requires you to use your burst, fire off a couple of normal attacks, do a charge shot, and then switch to your melee stance. So that the moment you're in melee stance, you can start applying Riptide and then dealing Riptide damage as much as humanly possible while having the maximum attack boost. That's just my suggestion. You can, of course, do your charge and your melee hits while you enter the melee stance. You just won't have your maximum attack until maybe after your first Riptide Slash. And, you know, it's all up to you and how you decide to play him. But yeah, my considerations are Rust is all-purpose. I think the Thundering Pulse is a genuine upgrade, unless, you know, you have higher energy numbers and higher refinements. But if you do have a whole bunch of energy, it might be worth switching to the Shimenawa set. Who knows? Just, I don't think the Thundering Pulse works too well with higher energy, unless you also balance out that energy usage by always immediately using your burst whenever possible. Just don't have so much energy that your burst is ready after using it, and then you're just sitting on it the whole time you're on cooldown. That would majorly suck. So maybe Shimenawa if you just have like a plethora of energy somehow. Working with the Thundering Pulse, I think that might work. But yeah, I think Thundering Pulse is for like low energy builds where you just have really sucky energy recharge substats, but you still want to go Heart of Depths. I think it's good for that. I think you do want to have a lot of energy whenever it comes to the Polar Star though, because you want to use your burst as much as possible, so that even though there's that 3-second gap in between the cooldown and the maximum amount of attack potential that you have, you don't want to have potential drought when it comes to the stack coming from your burst. So you want to have your burst ready almost at all times. You want to basically be sitting on it while it's in cooldown so that you're always dealing as much damage as humanly possible. You could probably go through 2 burst cycles while in melee stance and doing as much damage as you possibly can with Childe, which is great. That's 30 whole seconds where you're at maximum attack potential, dealing a whole bunch of skill damage. But like I said before, this weapon really prioritizes skill damage, and that is the only bonus damage you're getting aside from your Heart of Depth set. So you will be missing out on a lot of normal attack bonus damage that you would normally get with the other bows. And I haven't cranked out the numbers for the damage differences because I feel like that's kind of hard for me personally to predict, because crit rate is kind of random and it's not super reliable. Some people crit more often than others. Some people crit less often than others, even though they have the same exact crit rate. So I just don't think it would be a very honest attempt at differentiating the final damage between all these 3 different bows, but I am going to let you know what the playstyle is for those 3 different bows, and that this particular weapon really loves melee stance Childe, and it's good for about 30 seconds, I'd say. So do what you will with that information. Pull for what you want. If you already have the Thundering Pulse, I think it's a good option for him. If you already have Rust, I think it's a great option for him. If you're on the fence and you don't want to rely on skill damage to do most of your damage, maybe don't pull for the Polar Star. If you think that's super awesome and you love elemental skill damage, go for it. The Polar Star is a good option for elemental skill damage, especially if you are very, very good at keeping up those stacks with an aggressive playstyle. Personally, I am not that good at the aggressive playstyle to keep up all those stacks, because then I have to like remember a certain damage rotation and all that. But for some people, it's just second nature to them. For me, it's not. So if that's your preferred method of play, go for it. If it's fun for you, do it.
Riptide.
For me, I'm just gonna finish this out again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but hey, maybe I'll talk about another character. Maybe I'll show some gameplay. Maybe I'll do another challenge video. Whichever.
This is gonna hurt.
But for whatever it is that I decide to do, I hope that you enjoy it, and I'll see you when I do that. So until next time, stay tuned. Bye-bye.